Hello, I'm Thea Rademacher, president of Flint Hills Publishing, and I have today with me Flint Hills Publishing author Joan Sabinski. Joni and I have decided that we're going to have regular conversations exploring important topics from a spiritual perspective. Joni has unique intuitive abilities. She's been a professional psychic and a channel for many decades. Now, we are talking today, which is the day after the shooting in Kansas City, where so many people were gathered for the Chiefs' celebration of winning the Super Bowl. Now, any act of violence is a tragedy, but this one hit close to home. I have lived most of my life in Kansas, and I have been to the area where this violence happened many times, oftentimes bringing my young children with me. Now, I'm a lawyer, and I have many ideas about gun control. Joni, you have a degree in psychology and you've been a counselor before doing the work that you do now. But we aren't going to bring those particular perspectives into this discussion, but instead look at what happened from an energetic perspective. This is going to be a spiritual discussion. So, Joni, why are we seeing so many acts of violence in our country? When you and I were young, we didn't think about having to worry about going to a big event. Yesterday, two of my adult children who wanted to go made the decision not to go beforehand because they were afraid of violence. So, talk to us. What do you think's going on?
Well, to me, it seems very, very simple. Over the last several years, hatred and violence and fear have been promoted hugely at every level. You cannot turn on your television set without watching shows or watching the news that seem to be constantly talking about what to fear and what's wrong and who to hate and why to hate them. And then we have political candidates who also seem to be promoting this. Now, in a world where often many of us feel very, very helpless, we start watching these things and the anger builds and the fear gets huge. And we begin to think about, well, what can I do to protect myself or my family? And for instance, there are a lot of people that consider themselves preppers, which I have absolutely no problem with if they want to learn to farm and can food and prepare for different scenarios that could create hardship in their lives. But many of them also go out and buy guns and ammunition and other forms and devices to protect themselves. And this seems to be the ongoing thing, that we have to protect ourselves from our fellow man. And one of the ways that kids, particularly, and I'm talking teenagers, who have this burst of testosterone and this feeling of anger and helplessness that comes with being a teenager, wow, they can get a weapon and they can prove to the world that they're strong and they're not afraid of anything. And so they do stupid things. They get into a fight with a fellow student, and the first thought is coming back and shooting up the school. Or in the case of what happened in Kansas, I read something this morning that they think it began with an argument. So two people begin to argue, and instead of talking, finding common ground, working through things, they grab their guns and begin to shoot one another. This helps them to feel powerful. And it's a reflex out of fear and anger. And when we act reflectively, instead of looking over what options we have, when we just react instead of thinking, then violence often ensues. And I believe that's what's been happening now. But the bigger question in all of this is, why is so much fear and hatred being brought forward now? We all know that the energies on the planet are shifting, and we are all working toward, those of us who see ourselves as star seeds or spiritual people or metaphysicians or whatever title you want to give yourself, we are all working toward helping the vibration build toward the vibration of love. On the first Friday of every month, I do these channelings of the entities that are called Equinox. And for many years, I've been channeling them for 45 years. And for many of those years, they have told us that we are a fear-based world. That instead of allowing love to inform us as to how to act and be, we use fear. And as the vibrations change and we begin to feel a bit more helpless, as we're constantly being bombarded with what is wrong instead of what is right, it builds that fear. And fear is a wonderful tool for people who want to manipulate. So the more they can build the fear, the more things they can sell, like guns or whatever, the more they can build the fear, the more they can convince you that they're the only ones that can solve your fears, the more control they have over you. So of course, building the fear works in that scenario. And building love gets laughed at. Those of us that are considered woke or want to awaken love throughout the planet are laughed at and often made to feel like there's something wrong with us. Taylor Swift, for instance, has become the focal point of many people's anger, possibly because she's a billionaire, possibly because she's a woman, but there are a lot of billionaires that don't do 1/10 the wonderful gifting she does of her money, and she hides it. She doesn't go around saying, I did this, look at me, like so many other people do. She's not busy trying to take over Mars and build a spacecraft for the wealthy to go and leave this planet, which has been destroyed. No, she, like many of us, are working to make this planet healthy again. And this scares those that make money off of destruction.
You know, Joni, if I could jump in, I think it's important for us to, when you look at the pictures of the thousands and thousands and thousands of people who are joyfully, peacefully uniting in this fun celebration, it reminds me and heartens me. There are so many people who are the opposite of fear. There are so many people that are connecting, and I think that's so important for us to remember that, to focus on that.
Exactly. And
if you could speak to what we can, what those of us who, it was the three people, perhaps, is what they're saying, that, incited this.
and
So
it will make the rest of the people in this country afraid to do anything that unites us. So it's really interesting how separation seems to be the thing that is being promoted now. Us against them seems to be the thing that is being promoted. So now we have to look at this differently. We need to be thinking, no, instead of the me, there needs to be the we. When enough of us are coming together to do what's right, to love one another, to feed one another, to help our planet be healthy, to understand one another, no matter what we present as, to just recognize we are all human and we all want the same thing. We all want to be safe. We all want to be loved. We all want to feel like life is worth living. If we recognize the samenesses, then maybe the helplessness will begin to dissipate as we recognize the more we come together, the more we can succeed. All of us succeed. And the more that all of us succeed, the less we have to fear, the less feelings of helplessness, the less hatred. As we come together, we recognize there's nothing to fear by the immigrant population. All of us, practically all of us, are immigrants. My family came from Germany. Many families have come from all over, and they may have been hated at the time they came over, but they worked. They integrated themselves into society. They made America the great place that we are. Now focusing on the hatred of anyone that isn't us, focusing on the hatred of something as simple as gender identity. How in the world does someone's gender identity affect my life? What is there to be frightened of if someone chooses to change how they see themselves on the outside because the inside tells them that this is who they are? How does that hurt me? What does that do directly in my life that should create such hatred and fear? Absolutely nothing. What does it do if two males love each other and want to marry, or two females love each other and want to marry, or three people want to share their love with one another? Again, how does that affect me? Why does that create hatred? They are showing us love. Maybe not the kind of love that we practice every day, but it's love. Why is that frightening? Why does that engender hatred? Why are transgendered people so hated, so abused, and so many commit suicide now? For what? Because they think and maybe act a little bit differently than us? How does that affect us? That's part of what we need to be looking at.
Yeah.
When we
Well,
start feeling fear, or we
Mhm.
start being resentful, or any of these things, get to know the people who you're fearing. You know, the more we get to know other people, the more we recognize the sameness. The more we can understand each other, the more powerful we all become.
Well, it sounds like you are talking about connecting to divine love, as you said, putting the we over the me. So I would like you to share, what do you do to make that connection of divine love? And do you believe that our individual practices of connecting to this love can have an effect that will spread out further?
Well, I think the first thing that anyone needs to do is recognize whether or not they even like themselves. Many, many people on this planet do not like themselves. And so it's very easy, instead of looking at that and working on understanding themselves and working on giving themselves true divine love, they take their anger out on somebody else. It's a distraction. They don't have to work on themselves because it's not their fault that they don't have a good job. It's this person's fault because they took their job away. So the first practice you must do is understand yourself, understand your fears, understand your hatreds, understand when you feel helpless. Go back to that little child inside you that thought the world was wonderful until at some point they stopped. And love that child. And in loving that child, let that child blossom within you. Let that child begin to again see the beauty in the world instead of the terror and the pain. Once you've gotten past that, then the next step is analyze your beliefs. Why do you believe this? Do you believe this because everyone in your town believed it? Do you believe it because your parents believed it? Your minister told you to believe it? Your best friends believed it? Do you even know the people that you hate? So how many of you know someone transgendered or gay or lesbian or non-binary or Black? And I mean, really know them. I'm not saying, oh yeah, this person you talk to occasionally. No, really sit down and know them. How many of you have talked to the immigrants that have walked for thousands of miles in horrible inclement weather, in terrible conditions, because of the fear of staying where they were? How many of you have talked to anybody or anything that you fear? How many of you that consider yourself good Christians really practice what Jesus said, not what your minister tells you? How many of you have really, really absorbed the words of love instead of what so many evangelicals are doing, focusing on that which they hate? It's time to practice what Jesus said. Love thy neighbor as thyself. You are the same. And hatred only brings more pain. It doesn't make you feel better. It only makes all of us feel worse. And the same is true of fear. Whereas love is contagious. When you're in love, you want to share it with everybody. Everything is beautiful. When life feels wonderful, then you want to share it.
Joni, I want to ask you about, this idea of fear for those of us who, agree with what you're saying. We do work to make these connections. We do meditate. We move into a spiritual life. Do you think that the vibration of fear, even though at a personal level, like I've got some fears being a mother of 4, and where the women who helped raise me kind of help program me to be fearful. Do you think those kinds of fears have the kind of energetic vibrations that you're talking about fear in general?
Absolutely.
Ugh.
Anything that you focus on grows. And when I used to do an exercise in my classes where I would have people think about the most wonderful time in their life, and then take a break, go eat, talk, do whatever we're doing, come back, and then have them think about the worst memory they could conceive of. And the one that had the strongest vibration was that memory. That one was more crystal clear in people's mind.
Mhm.
And the room felt it. But the joyous memory was more subdued, more gentle. In some cases, much less clear. So when you're worrying, and it's normal to worry, you need to adjust that. The first thing that I do, if I remember, I mean, obviously I make mistakes, I'm human. When I remember, is say to myself, in the scheme of the entirety of my life, how big a deal is this really? Then I say to myself, is this even realistic? In my long life, I've had a lot of terrible things occur, almost none of which I worried about. They just seemed to come out of the blue. It was those things that I worried about that never manifested and never will. I've decided they're not supposed to. So I look at it and I say, how possible is this really? When I see how possible it is, if I see that there is a possibility that this could occur, then I say to myself, what do I do if it does? I make a plan. Because when you have a plan as to how to handle something, the fear kind of starts dissipating because you know what you're going to do. And if it's too big to make a plan for, like, oh my gosh, a nuclear bomb's going to come and fall on our head. All right. If it's too big to make a plan for, then you have to find a reason to just say, if I can't do anything about it, then the only thing left is surrender. I surrender. I will do everything in my power to make sure that can't happen. But if it does, then I will go with a smile. Because what else can you do? You can worry, you can make yourself sick, you can become a recluse, you could become a prepper and hide in a hole in the ground. But I would argue, you really want to come back to a world that has been pretty much destroyed, and all that are left are other paranoid people like you?
Well, girlfriend, I know you have no fear of the other side. And we have certainly covered a lot of topics today, and it's giving me a lot more ideas of things I want to talk to you about in the future. But thank you for talking with us today. I'm feeling better. I'm stepping out of fear. I'm going to send lots and lots of love to my beloved Kansas City, both the Kansas and the Missouri side. And just thank you for being here. You know, Joni, as I mentioned, is one of my authors. You can find out all about her books, her intuitive work, the channeling of equinox that she does once a month, which is open to the public at her website, which is intuitivedirections.net. And Joni, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. Once again, it uplifts, and just it's an honor to work with you. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Thea.